The Charnel House Trilogy is one of 2 games I'm adding to this retrospective for having relation to Wadjet despite not being published or developed by the studio. Basically, this game and Kathy Rain, which we'll get to later, have staff close to Wadjet who have had major involvement with their projects, but they were primarily the creation of different studios. In Kathy Rain's case, Dave Gilbert and several regular voice actors joined production to handle voice work. For the Charnel House Trilogy, Gilbert had no involvement, though he does have a cameo credit, which may simply be a joke, as the game does reference many of his Blackwell series multiple times. But Abe Goldfarb, Ben Chandler, and Francisco Gonzalez were involved significantly with development. Chandler's touch is easily the most felt, making the title almost indistinguishable from a Wadjet release. The actual development house, however, was Alcave, who are responsible for the rocky but incredibly well-written Richard and Alice 2 years before this released in commercial form. This puts me in a bit of an awkward spot, as while I respect pretty much every name involved with this project, I kinda don't like it. Well, no, maybe that's too strong a way to put it. I like it quite a bit, just not for the reasons they intended. Richard and Alice was a point-and-click adventure with outright amateur artwork and sprites, but it still sticks in my mind for the sheer power of its writing and how it brings its grim scenario to life through prose and clever plot structure, ending on an incredibly human note I didn't expect. When I first played the Charnel House Trilogy, I didn't care for it, seeing as a taste of things yet to come for a planned sequel teased at the end, oddly devoid of content or a satisfying emotional endpoint. Upon replay, I think this may be one of the funniest games I've ever played, despite the fact it's a horror game. There are jokes, but I hardly laughed at any of them. It's several serious moments that somehow became riffing material worthy of Mystery Science Theater 3000 treatment, along with one casting decision that somehow makes plenty of sense, yet little sense at the same time. It's a very strange game. Gonzalez is simply listed as Chandler's assistant, but Chandler himself was involved with not only additional writing and puzzle design, but was in charge of the art in the second episode of the game while helping with the first and third episodes. I'm willing to bet that his art became the basis for the rest of the game, with his assets reused throughout all the episodes and other designed or redesigned with his style in mind. This makes the game feel very whole, though this might be because the other artist involved had worked with Chandler and Wadjet before. Ivan Ulanov, who did portraits and photo work for the Chivas Kosher Edition and Blackwell Epiphany, would have a solid idea of how to work with Chandler's style by now, explaining why the whole product looks like it was put together so smoothly. The soundtrack is much stranger, made up of works of roughly 7 different artists and composers, but you hardly realize it as you play. As for voice work, Abe Goldfarb has a fairly major role in the game as a trained bartender, a role that flips the entire narrative on its head. He doesn't go far out of his usual wheelhouse, but he doesn't need to either. I almost listed Aisha Taylor as a Wadjet regular because he sounds a great deal like Daryl Lathan as one of Alex's friends, making me wonder if it is Lathan and he used an alias since this actor only has one role, but I don't think I'll ever know for sure. The rest of the voice cast is all over the place, with lots of new faces who pull out mixed performances. Some characters feel stilted in their delivery, like Alex's friends, or are a tad too naturalistic, as is the case with Peter Wellington as Dr. Lang. He plays his role like he's acting in a live-action work, making him stick out among the rest of the cast. Voice acting generally calls for more exaggerated to-the-point delivery, but Wellington's style sounds like his audio is taken from clips of a TV show, complete with coughing and audiobook-style delivery at points for narration. There are 3 major standouts besides Goldfarb. Madeleine Roux, who also did some of the writing for the game, plays the lead Alex and does a great job despite having no voice acting credits. She's not an actor but an accomplished writer, but I didn't pick up on this lack of acting talent just due to all the confidence she manages to give Alex, not to mention how effortless her more dramatic moments sound. Jonathan Greer, another no-credits actor, is great as the conductor Don, doing a better naturalistic performance than Williams by focusing on making an accent and carefully changing the pitch of his voice to match the scene and severity of what he's saying. As for the last standout, he remains the most single interesting thing in the entire game, simply because of who he is and what he managed to do with his role. That last person is Jim Sterling. Yes, that Jim Sterling, as Robert Crow, Alex's neighbor. He's done some voice work since 2014 with Jazz Punk and a few other indie titles, but this was the first time I came across him in a game, and I was instantly engrossed with his bizarre Nicolas Cage-like performance. I don't mean he sounds like Nicolas Cage, I mean he's acting in a way where you're not even sure he's acting anymore. He sounds completely out of place at first with his character portrait in the first episode, but once he reappears in the last episode, he steals every single scene he's in, going all in to the point that it's hard to make out if he's acting or just completely lost in his character. It's so bad and hammy that it actually circles all the way back around to being one of the best performances I've ever heard at points.
Slice the girl away, Alex. Look at her insides. Put her belly. Find the key.
What the fuck?
Charnel House Trilogy is divided into 3 episodes of sorts, a middle one being the original freeware release that got remastered for this version. This results in a strange situation where all 3 episodes have important narrative connections, but episode 2 has little to do with the main story of 1 and 3. Those episodes follow Alex and her issues with her father and ex-boyfriend, while the second is about Harold Lang. They have completely different writing styles, with episode 1 and 3 being very direct about what's occurring, while the second is much more unclear, and what horrors there really works outside some clever sound design. Finding a model train in a box of dirt and worms is an idea that could have worked in a novel or a short story, but where the prose can be used to push a mood, but it translates into borderline comedy in a visual space, as does most of the episode. It takes itself too seriously as ridiculous things keep occurring, like the creepy zombie man with a zone-up mouth who makes funny grunts, thanks to Ben Chandler's voice acting, playing with an origami dog. It doesn't help that there's not much to latch onto in Lang's story besides a hint that he's an alcoholic and has a history with violence or some sort of accident in his past, but that's only a tiny fraction of the episode before the ridiculous worm imagery kicks up. Alex's story fares better because the game is much more open about what's happening with her, and the big reveal is shocking enough to avoid taking the power from her story showing too much. However, the game's goofiest bits come from her 2 episodes, starting with the weird grub man teleporting around her apartment during lightning strikes, and later moving on to stuff like Dawn talking to a raven, snapping its neck, and then stuffing it in his coat as he looks around hoping no one sees him. I'm not making that up. That happens. It's never explained, and if it's symbolic of anything, it's not clear to what it's drawing attention to. It's just a bizarre moment that never comes back into play.
Aye, I reckon so.
Once Jim Sterling starts hamming it up in episode 3, all pretense of psychological horror goes out the window as he starts screaming about the worms eating his eyes and phrases like dirty fucking boys and Jezebel being repeated over and over. The larger story the game is building up is vastly less interesting than Alex's unrelated baggage, the mystery of Augur Peak feeling like it's missing any sort of significant mention to build it up. They say keeping the audience in the dark is the key to horror, but this game simply can't figure out how to translate that to horror when all of its imagery and ideas are explored in such an absurd way. It's not a bad game, not by any means, but it fails at a lot what it's trying to do. Its jokes are more obnoxious than funny, and its scares are more perplexing or hilarious than terrifying or foreboding. It looks great, it sounds great, and I highly suggest you play with the headphones due to some interesting stereo audio track tricks, but the actual content is told in a very clunky manner that doesn't take advantage of its medium enough. At least I can't say it's forgettable. I just hope Alcave's next release is closer to Richard Alice than this, because the studio clearly has some great ideas and talent. Their sophomore attempt was just a bit of a slip-up.